Hello and welcome to Symposia Online. I'm so glad that you can join us today. If you can, please share this video so that way you can watch today's service with your friends and family. Also, if you have any praise or prayer requests, please put that in the comments below so a member of our launch team can reach out to you. Enjoy the service.
Well, good morning, church. Wherever you're watching with us this morning, would you join us as we worship our God? Come on, we sing. Oh, how high would I climb mountains if the mountains are where you hide? Oh, how far I'd scale the valleys if you grace the other side. Oh, how long have I chased rivers from lonely seas to where they rise, against the rush of grace descending from the source of its supply. 'Cause in the highlands and the heartache, you're neither more or less inclined. I will search and stop in nothing. You're just not that hard to find. Ooh. So I will praise you on the mountain. I will praise you in the mountains in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands, in the heartache, all the same. Whoa, whoa. Oh, how far beneath your glory does your kindness extend the path, from where your feet rest on the sunrise to where you sweep the sinner's path. And oh, how fast would you come running if just a shadow were through the night? Trace my steps through all my fears. and walk me out the other side. But who could dare ascend that mountain, the valleyed hill called Calvary? But for the one I call Good Shepherd, who like a lamb was slain for me. Oh, I will praise you on the mountain. I will praise you in the mountains in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leaves me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands, in the heart, it goes the same. Whoa, whoa. Wherever I walk through, wherever I am, your name can move mountains. Wherever I stand, if ever I walk through the valley of death, I'll sing through the shadows, my song will sing. Wherever I walk through, wherever I am, your name can move mountains. Wherever I stand, and if ever I walk through the valley of death, I'll sing through the shadows, my song will sing, my song will sing. Oh, we sing, my song will sing. From the gravest of all valleys come the pastures we call grace, a mighty river flowing upwards from a deep but empty grave. Oh, I will praise you on the mountain. I will praise you in the mountains in my way. You're the summit where my feet are. So I will praise you in the valleys all the same. No less God within the shadows, no less faithful when the night leads me astray. You're the heaven where my heart is. In the highlands, in the heart, it go the same. Thank you, God.
Help me, Holy Ghost. I need you more than anything. All my best ideas are yours. So what am I but what you make of me? So help me, God. Breathe on my weakness, for all I want is to be like Jesus. I don't have much, but what I have is yours to use. So make my whole life your approach. Help me, Holy Ghost. I need you more than I can say. So help me, God, breathe on my weakness, for all I want is to be like Jesus. I don't have much, but what I have is yours to use. So make my whole life your approved. Oh, you're the So help me, breathe on my weakness, for all I want is to be like Jesus. I don't have much, but what I have is yours to use. So make my whole life your approved.
Here at Symposia, we want you to get to know each other. So we have a series of small groups, and if you'd be interested in joining, please visit our website at www.symposia.church, and in the upper right-hand corner, select Groups. There, you will find a listing of our groups that are available for this term, and you can also select the one that fits you the best. We look forward to seeing you in our small groups. Are you bored on a Wednesday? How about a Friday? Well, we have something in favor for you. On Wednesdays, our lead pastor Fidel will have his online Bible study. Please stay tuned to our Facebook page so that you can receive the link for the 8 p.m. Zoom Bible study. Also, if you can't make the Wednesday night Bible study, have no worries. It will be restreamed on Facebook on Friday at 8 p.m. We look forward to seeing you there as well. If you are new to Symposia, we are glad that you could join us today. If you are one of our regular members, we thank you for returning to service even though we're online. While we do miss you, we want to let you know that we're doing everything that we can to return when it is best possible for everyone involved. Here at Symposia, your generosity goes a long way. Because of your continued giving, we've been able to have outreach programs in our local community and also provide resources and supplies to members that have been affected during the current crisis. If you came prepared to give, you can give on our website at www.symposia.church/give or via text by texting your dollar amount to 84321. Again, we thank you for your continued giving and your generosity towards Symposia. And to give, you can either do it on our website at www.symposia.church/give or via text message by texting your dollar amount to the number 84321. Thank you, thank you, thank you for your continued generosity.
Welcome once again to our home. My name is Fidel Arnacilio, and I'm the lead pastor here at Symposia Covenant Church. You're probably surprised to see me, considering that I announced last week that we're supposed to have Sister Minerva de la Fuente to be the one who's supposed to preach today. But something happened, and then so I'm just going to preach today. And I will reschedule Sister Minerva to preach sometime this November or sometime in December. Okay, so sorry for those of you who are probably wanting to hear her preach, right? You're probably sick and tired of me preaching for 4 Sundays in a row, right? But now we're going to have the 5th Sunday today, okay? So what I decided to do then, so instead of actually starting with the new series of sermon, I wanted to actually just I just added a new sermon, the one that I'm going to preach today, to the series that I started that I did last month. Okay, So last month, we talked about prophetic words for such a time as this. And then we talked about the danger of religious thinking. We talked about idolatrous political engagement. We talked about on the third Sunday, we talked about the moral integrity of the church in crisis. Okay. And then last week we talked about resisting deceptive schemes. Okay, so it's good I remember all four. Okay, so I hope you guys remember that too. But today what we're gonna do is we're gonna look at again it's in the same series, and I wanted to talk about sheep without a shepherd. So this is something that I just recently added about I thought about like 2-3 days ago. Now, so sheep without a shepherd. Now, many of you are probably already familiar with this, that we evangelicals, Symposia is an evangelical church. Evangelicals were actually have been engaged in culture wars for so long, right? It's probably for about 100 or more years. So somehow evangelicals engaged in culture wars that they themselves somehow created, or that we created, right? Because considering that I am also an evangelical, and Symposia is considered to be an evangelical church. Now, but the question I think we need to ask is this: are evangelicals, in some sense, losing the culture wars that they're actually engaged in? So before I do that, let me actually just give you a definition for what is evangelicalism. I know many people who are evangelicals, they're not even aware that they are referred to as evangelicals. Okay, many of you actually go to church. You are so used to calling yourself Christians, but many of you are actually attending an evangelical church, and you are probably even active in an evangelical church. So whether you like it or not, you are an evangelical, right? So, but what is evangelicalism? Not evangelism, but evangelicalism. Now, evangelicalism is a spiritual theological ethos, according to Roger Olson. So you're supposed to see the slide here being projected. So evangelicalism, according to Roger Olson, professor of theology at Baylor University in Texas. It's a Baptist university. And this is what he says: evangelicalism is a spiritual theological ethos marked by biblicism, that is the belief in the centrality of the Bible, right? Conversionism, that is also the belief in the importance of a Christian conversion, being converted, right, to Christianity. Crucicentrism, that is the centrality of the cross of Jesus Christ. And activism, being engaged in mission, being engaged in evangelism. Plus, deep respect for Orthodox Christianity as expressed by the earliest Christian creeds and councils and by the Protestant reformers. I think that is probably a good way of actually defining evangelicalism. That's why I'm actually using that. Roger Olson is also an expert on Christian denominations. I think he's the one who actually edited or wrote the encyclopedia of Christian denominations. So he's very familiar with with evangelicalism and how to actually even define that particular term. Now, so many of you are actually evangelicals because somehow you fit that kind of description. So you think that the Bible is central. You think that people should be converted to Christ or to Christianity. You think that somehow the cross is central to the message of Christianity. That you think that somehow missions and evangelism are actually all important. Okay. Now, so what evangelicals are generally opposed to, anyways? What do they oppose? How come? What are these culture wars that they are actually engaged in? So let me begin. This is not an exhaustive list, but this is just a few of the examples that they are actually engaged in. That they generally opposed. Okay. One is evolution, for example. That pretty much started in the early 1900s, where evangelicals actually opposed Darwinism, evolution. Many of you probably do not even know that evangelicals even opposed, generally speaking, the civil rights movement. Okay, they opposed a civil rights movement. Now, many of you probably do not even know that evangelicals also opposed mixed race dating and marriage. Probably many of you are surprised that those are the things that evangelicals actually opposed, right? You know, who in their right mind, at least today, right, will actually think that civil rights movement should be opposed, right? But that is during that time, right? Many evangelicals actually somehow what? Opposed the civil rights movement. So they opposed abortion rights, okay? They opposed LGBTQ rights, okay, including the right to get married, okay, or not the right to get married, but just they opposed same-sex marriage, okay. Many evangelicals also opposed the separation of church and state in a way. They might not say that explicitly, but in their actions, in their behaviors, they seem to oppose separation of church and state. They even opposed the prohibition of explicit political partisanship. They wanted to be involved in some kind of political partisanship. That's the reason why many evangelicals will align themselves with a particular political party. Okay, so these are the things that evangelicals somehow generally opposed. But one thing that probably many of you do not know, that in almost every single thing that they actually fought for, somehow they actually lost. Okay, evangelicals. Just look at what happened in evolution right now, let's say, right? Evolution is something that is actually widely accepted. Okay, if you remember what happened in Scopes monkey trial, many of you probably heard about this in 1925, when John Scope, a high school teacher, high school science teacher, taught evolution right in public classroom. This is in the state of Tennessee. And during that time, right, in Tennessee, it is actually unconstitutional for someone to actually teach on the theory of evolution. Now, many of you do not know this, but the Scopes monkey trial actually, despite the fact that John Scopes actually lost the case in the Supreme Court, it actually triggered other Supreme Court cases that eventually shape public school education in the U.S. If you notice, if you go to public schools today, they don't teach creationism in public schools. They actually teach evolution. So who actually won in this cultural war? It's not the evangelicals, right? It's not the evangelicals, okay? As a matter of fact, surprisingly, many churches today are very open, right, to the theory of evolution. That is not the case like 20 years ago. So, for example, one of the major Christian thinkers of our time is Francis Collins. So I have a quote here that will be projected on the screen. Francis Collins is the director of National Institute of Health, okay, the NIH. So he was appointed first by W. Bush, reappointed by Obama twice, and is actually appointed by President Trump, okay, to actually head the National Institute of Health. He was also the leader of the Human Genome Project. So you probably heard about that. So this guy is not a cheapy scientist. But he is also a devout evangelical. So look at what he says here about evolution. Okay, so let's look at the quote here. It says, "The evidence supporting the idea that all living things are descended from a common ancestor, right, is truly overwhelming. I would not necessarily wish that to be so as a Bible-believing Christian, but it is so. It does not serve faith well to try to deny that." So he himself, a devout evangelical, a Bible-believing Christian, actually cannot help but affirm, right, what scientists claim about the theory of evolution. Now, even when you look at some denominations, okay, some conservative denominations, one of them is the Assemblies of God on evolution. Did you guys know, and I know I have a lot of Assemblies of God friends, right? I was born and raised in the Assemblies of God. That's why I'm very familiar with this. The doctrine of creation stated by the Assemblies of God in 1977 ruled out evolution as a possibility. And then what happened is that in their doctrine of creation in 2010, they did not rule it out, but as a matter of fact, they claim that they are actually open to the possibility of evolution. And then after they said that, there was a backlash coming from some fellow Christians, right? And then after a while, they actually revised the doctrine of creation again in 2014. And then in 2014 revision, they explicitly stated again that they're ruling out the possibility of evolution. So that seems a little weird, right? That a denomination will actually constantly change their statement about a particular belief. Okay, so they ruled it out, and then as after a while they became open to it, and then after a while they actually ruled it out. I'm not criticizing the Assemblies of God. I love that denomination. I was born and raised as an Assemblies of God. Okay, so the point I'm trying to make is that if you ask the question, who won in that culture war against evolution, it's not the evangelicals who actually won against that. Now, so what about the evangelicals and the civil rights movement? Okay, many evangelicals, okay, including their leaders, did not support the civil rights movement. Okay, and probably many of you didn't even know that. They actually didn't like what Martin Luther King Jr. was doing. Okay. Let me give you some proofs here, okay? So here's a quote from Dr. Matthew J. Hall, a Southern Baptist historian. And look at what he said. White evangelicals throughout the South were overwhelmingly opposed to the civil rights movement. Okay, so this guy is a Southern Baptist historian. And he continued in the same article by saying something like this. White evangelicals, particularly those in the South, were deeply invested in efforts to either uphold Jim Crow or to try to slow down its dismantling. So you should see on the screen the two quotes that I just actually read. Now, when I say white evangelicals, please do not read that as if I'm demonizing white people. I love white people. Okay, I don't want you to actually think of that as something derogatory, right? When we actually use those kind of labels. Okay. Now, so that's clear, right? In the quotes that I actually read, that it looks like evangelicals were actually, known for being opposed to the civil rights movement. Let me give you another quote here, and this quote is from the National Association of Evangelicals in their initial reaction to the 1964 Civil Rights Act. And look at what it says. It says something like this: "Civil rights is not the business of the church." So the NAE, the National Association of Evangelicals, has strictly stayed out of this area. Okay, so they didn't even actually positively supported. This is the National Association of Evangelicals, did not publicly support, right, the Civil Rights Act of 1964. Let me give you another example here. This is from a quote from Dr. Carl Ellis, an evangelical seminary professor who participated in the civil rights movement before he became an evangelical. But after he became an evangelical, look at actually what he said. Okay, this is what he said. Okay, so he was a part of the civil rights movement, and then he was converted to evangelicalism. And look at what he said. Okay, he said, "That unspoken evangelical thinking came upon me. You should not be concerned about civil rights." Now, I never read any explicit stuff about it, according to Carl Ellis, right? But just the sense that I got, it was part of the ethos of what it meant to be an evangelical back then. Now, again, all of these quotes seem to actually show, right, that many evangelicals, including their leaders, did not support the civil rights movement. And that should be shocking for us who are actually evangelicals. Okay. Now, and that's the reason why, if you actually look at Billy Graham, for example, look at what he said here in this particular quote. This is actually a very famous quote from Billy Graham. And I want you to actually at least read this with me. So Billy Graham says, okay, "I don't want to see religious bigotry in any form. It would disturb me if there was a wedding between the religious fundamentalist and the political right. The hard right has no interest in religion except to manipulate it." He said that in a parade in 1981. Now, what was happening during that time? In the early part of the 1980s, that was actually the time when when evangelicals are trying to actually, in some sense, merge with a political party, in some sense, not merge in a formal way, right? But they wanted to somehow mix evangelicalism with, let's say, the Republican Party. And somehow, when you look at Billy Graham, he's actually a very perceptive guy, okay? And that's the reason why he said that this is some kind of a marriage that we evangelicals should actually avoid, because by the mixing of the two, what happened is that we are the ones who end up losing the battle. Because again, political groups, right, their goal is to actually what? Manipulate religion, manipulate Christians, manipulate evangelicals to actually serve their political purposes. Okay, again, that did not come from my mouth, right? It came from the mouth of Billy Graham. I know if I'm the one who say that, many of you will be upset with me, right? But this is a guy that many of you actually respect, okay? But he himself made that same conclusion, right? And is seemingly seeing, in some sense, the failure of evangelicals, right, in the area of politics, where it allowed politics to somehow ruin the faith in some sense. Because that's actually what was happening during that time. Okay? Now, I want you to actually look at this quote from Martin Luther King Jr. And he said something very similar to this, right? Similar to what Billy Graham actually said. Martin Luther King Jr. says, "The church must be reminded that it is not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state." Okay, the church is not the master or the servant of the state, but rather the conscience of the state. And it must be the guide and the critic of the state and never its tool. Right? I hope you guys are understanding how even Martin Luther King Jr. actually saw how government or the state can actually use the church, right, to actually promote their, the government's own political advantage, where the church becomes a tool for the state. Now, these wise people, okay, they've been warning us about this for so long. And this quote from Martin Luther King Jr. was like probably in the 60s. Right? Or probably even the 50s or the 60s. Are you guys following me here? They perceive the problem here. But somehow, and this is something that somehow many people find frustrating, probably including me. I find this to be frustrating, to see evangelicals somehow failing to actually heed to the wise counsel of these people who are known to be very perceptive people. Okay? Now, so why did evangelicals lose in the culture wars? One is this. I think evangelicals have been fighting in this culture wars out of their insecurities. I think that's one of the problems. That's why evangelicals tend to be defensive rather than intellectually honest. So instead of actually promoting intellectual honesty, what happened is that they become more and more defensive. They fight out of insecurities, right? So they're always paranoid that they are being persecuted. They're always paranoid that the system or the political system is somehow behind the scene trying to figure out ways to actually destroy Christianity or to destroy the Christians. So and they even say that even if the president is a Christian or something like that, right? They seem to think that even though most of the senators and most of the Congress people are actually churchgoers, right? And they say that they seem to have the sense of paranoia, right? And that's the reason why evangelicals over and over again are susceptible to be moved by fears. That's why politicians, one after another, right, will try to actually use our fears to actually direct our attention, to actually lead us into to a place where we don't even want to be, right? Because we are actually what? We are controlled by our fears. Now, another thing that I think that made evangelicals lose this culture wars is intellectual incompetence, right? We are actually ill-equipped to defend and support our own views. Try this. If you know something about, something about evolution, for example, Ask a regular evangelical to defend their view why they think evolution is actually not true. Just try it. Okay, I will actually challenge you. Just try it. Talk to them, and ask them if they even understand what exactly is the issue. For the most part, they don't. Okay, I know I grew up as an evangelical, right? I grew up in a church where people are all anti-evolutionist. But if you ask them to defend their view, to support their view, even if you ask them what even is evolution, many of them do not even know what it is about, right? They are actually susceptible to be deceived by false claims. Why? Because they're actually ill-equipped to defend and support their own views. They're easily fooled by politicians. Why? Because they are most of the time misinformed or uninformed. Now, if you will get mad at me for what I just said there, right? Check it yourself, right? Ask any evangelical, right, around you, and ask them to explain to you what is evolution. Explain to you why the church opposed evolution, right? And what's wrong with the scientific evidences in evolution, right? I guarantee you, many of them will not even know what to actually say, but they will get mad at me for saying these things, okay? Now, so another thing is that they're also interested in the acquisitions of immediate political powers and influence. So that's the reason why evangelicals never had lasting significance. The impact of what they do, right, do not last for a long time, right? Because they're always concerned about how can we, right, impose immediately our influence and our power on people now, right? How can we actually shove our religion on the throat of other people? And then mostly, evangelicals are actually focused on winning rather than the truth. They're concerned about politically winning rather than the truth. They're concerned about politically winning rather than justice. They're concerned about politically winning rather than what is good. And that's the reason why often, over and over again, they are easily manipulated by political pressures. So the point I wanted to make here is this. My observation is that evangelicals in general are completely lost. They do not really know what they're supposed to do. And that's the reason why when you look at the history of their culture wars, they practically lost their culture wars. They practically lost it, right? Whatever it is that they're fighting against is the one that is actually what? that actually won the battle. Okay. Because probably the problem here has to do with the fact that probably evangelicals are, I don't know why this is the case, right? And again, I'm just being honest with you. You know, I am an evangelical pastor in an evangelical church. I should not be saying these things. But I think it needs to be said, right? I think evangelicals lost almost all of their battles. From the beginning until now, right? It looks like that is seemingly what actually happened to evangelicals. Now, how do we know that it is actually losing its wars? So let me give you some examples here. And I know many of you are not aware of this, but I don't think it will hurt for you to be made aware of these things. Okay. I know some of you will say, "Oh, I would rather not have known that, right? So that I could have just lived as if like nothing wrong is actually happening with evangelicalism, right?" But it needs to be said, right? Because if you guys are concerned about the church in its posterity, right? What will happen to the church 10, 20 years, 30 years, 50 years from now, right? Because many of you are trying to fight, right, for Christianity. Right? You wanted to fight for America as being the Christian nation. But if you are not going to actually look long term, right, you're not going to win this battle. Right? So, for example, now many major evangelical institutions today are actually, at least some of them, are dropping the name evangelical. They don't want to be associated with evangelicals anymore, which is weird. Let me give you an example here. For 80 years, Princeton Evangelical Fellowship, this is a group of Christian students at Princeton University, referred to themselves to their group as the Princeton Evangelical Fellowship because they're so proud of that term evangelical there. But now, after all these years, they decided it needs to be dropped. They need to drop the name evangelical. I think they ended up putting Princeton Christian Fellowship, something like that. After 8 years, they actually decided to drop the term evangelical because they thought that there's just something, people have so much misconception, right, about what an evangelical means, okay? Because of a lot of the boo-boos that many of us have done, okay, to actually tarnish that very name evangelical, right? Another institution here. For 47 years, Evangelical for Social Action referred to themselves as Evangelicals for Social Action. Okay, but now they're also decided to drop the word evangelical and change it to Christian, and so now they are called Christian for Social Action. It's actually a major evangelical institution. Okay, and then books after books have been written recently in the past 4 or 5 years on what it means to be an evangelical, who should be an evangelical. Like one of them is even published by Yale University Press. There's one person who actually wrote a book, Still Evangelical, with a question mark in the end. Now, and then articles after articles in major magazines and newspapers talk about this, right? Many people will actually call themselves, post-conservative evangelicals or progressive evangelicals because they don't want to be associated with conservative evangelicals. Highly educated evangelicals are actually now not wanting the label evangelical, right? So eventually, right, it's like a person who's actually embarrassed to have whatever last name they have, right? Because of the kind of association, right? So I'm assuming no one will actually want to be called Fidel Hitler, right? So if your last name is Hitler, probably you need to change it, right? Because you don't want to be associated with Hitler. Do you guys follow what I'm actually pointing out here? Right? Same thing here. It looks like these people are actually not comfortable to even be called evangelicals anymore. Okay? And you guys know that a lot of young people are actually leaving the church, leaving evangelical churches, because they don't want to be associated also with the politics, the theology, the bigotry, right? That are commonly associated with evangelicalism. Highly educated evangelicals are actually leaving evangelicalism. They're becoming Catholics, Orthodox, mainline Protestants. Some of them just become atheists, right? Many people are leaving evangelicalism because there's so much confusion about who we are as evangelicals. So much confusion about what we are supposed to do as evangelicals. I think that becomes the problem. And this will actually lead me to the verse that I actually wanted to talk about today. And I'm just going to be here. I'm just going to do this briefly. Because one thing I wanted to do is to make you understand what exactly is the problem. And why did I say that there's even a problem at all? Okay. But I want you to read Matthew 9:35 to 38. And look at what it says. Then Jesus went about all the cities and villages, teaching in their synagogues, and proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and curing every disease and every sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion for them, because they were harassed and helpless, like sheep without a shepherd. So that's where I got the title of this sermon, right? Like sheep without a shepherd. Then he said to his disciples, "The harvest is plentiful, but the laborers are few." Last verse. Therefore, ask the Lord of the harvest to send out laborers into his harvest. Now, what was the ministry of Jesus? Teaching, preaching, and healing. Okay. And by ministering to the people, what happened is that you begin to see the need of the people. Right? You cannot see the need of the people without getting your hands dirty. Right? And this is what Jesus did, right? He went to them. He preached to them, right? He taught them. He healed them. And as he actually ministered to the people, he began to understand their needs. Jesus understood that they were harassed and helpless. And that's why Jesus actually had compassion for them. You guys know that the ones who are truly called in the ministry are the ones who actually feel the passion for people, compassion for people. That's how you can tell when a person is actually genuinely called into the ministry. Now, calling to a ministry should have been formed out of compassion for people who are hurting, people who are confused, people who are mad, people who are angry, people who are feeling guilt, people who are ignorant, people who are slave to their own sinfulness, right? Someone or a person who is actually genuinely called by God, right, must actually feel those kind of stuff, right? They must have this kind of compassion for people. And you know, as a pastor, I have compassion for people. I have compassion for those who are outside the church, and I have compassion for those who are inside the church. But the more I observe evangelicals, so these are the people within my tribe, right? Because I am an evangelical. I am actually feeling sad, right? Why? Because I seem to actually look at them, us as evangelicals, as if we are actually sheep without a shepherd. What will explain why we're actually always on the wrong side of history? Okay. Why is that the case? You know, we have more than 3 strikes already. Okay. Now, sheep without a shepherd. So when I look at evangelicalism as a whole, I see sheep without a shepherd. We've always been on the wrong side of history. We've failed to show the world that we have reliable spiritual discernment. If you have reliable spiritual discernment, at least we should get it right once in a while. But it looks like almost everything that we are actually opposed to, right? We're actually defeated on every single area that we actually opposed in the past. Probably because some of those things we're not supposed to oppose. We just happen that we are just on the wrong side. Okay. You know, Jesus knew that there were Pharisees, Sadducees, scribes, and other religious leaders. But Jesus saw God's people as sheep without a shepherd, despite the fact that there were Pharisees, there were Sadducees, there were religious leaders, there were priests. You know, what about today? There are pastors, right? There are teachers. There are prestigious seminary professors. There are top-notch theologians and scholars. There are politically connected religious leaders. There are denominational leaders. There are huge churches. There are mega-church pastors with great oratorical skills. And there are even a presidential favor because the president currently favors, right, the evangelicals. But none of these things imply that we have a shepherd. Are you guys following me here? None of these things imply that we have a shepherd because we seem to be lost in a way, right? How can we be pretty much on the wrong side of history most of the time, right? It looks like there's actually something wrong here, right? It looks like we are not discerning the times correctly. Now, we are doing the right things for all the wrong reasons. We have failed in pretty much all the battles that we participated in. We are not going to be able to change our course or the history of our group, of our tribe as evangelicals until we recognize that we have failed as a church. Until we recognize that we have failed as a church. We cannot win our culture wars by relying on political procedures and successes. Because that does not imply, right, that we are actually what? Gaining some dominion, right, on the minds of people, on the culture that actually govern the lives of people. Political procedures and successes are the things that got us into some of our big messes. But somehow we rely on political procedures and successes to somehow rescue us and somehow to actually make us dominate. That's why we don't have spiritual power even if we have political power. I hope you guys are following me here. You know, Jesus said we need to be what need to be harvested, or at least there's a need for more people to actually harvest whatever needs to be harvested. But always keep this in mind. what need to be harvested will always be more than the harvesters. There will always be a need for more people who will actually help the church in actually pursuing its goals, its mission, its vision. There will always be more room for more Christian leaders. Okay, there will always be more room for more shepherds. You will never run out of a job for the church. There's always something to do. There are always people who still haven't heard about Jesus. There are always people who are actually lost, right? So what should we do then? Okay, and this is where I'll end. I don't know how long did I preach here, but I hope it's not that long. Okay, but what should we then do? Okay, so let me give you some. I don't even know if this is practical, but it sounded like it's practical to me when I was thinking about this. We need to redisciple evangelicals and would-be evangelicals. Okay, we need to redisciple ourselves. We need to redisciple the church. Redisciple the church. I think there, again, history will show us that we've done pretty much almost everything the wrong way. Okay, so what do? We redisciple people. How do we do that? We have to invite first. Invite, 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 invite. Another thing is this. Thoughtful rediscipleship that takes Jesus of the gospel seriously and turn us into compassionate redisciplers is probably what we will need. I said we. Okay, I'm not just talking about. I'm not just talking to you here. I'm talking about myself as well. What we need is thoughtful rediscipleship, right? What we need to do is to increase the number of thoughtful redisciplers. When I say thoughtful, some people who are thinking, right? People who are reflective. Okay, that's what we need. What we need is a more examined, a much more examined Christian life, right? A much more thoughtful one, a much more reflective one. Now, when probably some of you will say, "Good luck on that, Pastor June," right? Because it looks like that's going to be a difficult task. But I think we're going to try, right? At least at Symposia, that's what we're trying to do, right? We need to stop undermining the importance of rediscipling our minds. Let me say that again. We need to stop undermining the importance of rediscipling our minds. We always fail at discernment because we've always been misinformed and uninformed, right? That seems to be the truth about evangelicals, right? We always fail at discernment. Why? Because we've always been misinformed or uninformed. Okay, again, I can cite so many examples because I grew up in church that will actually tell you that we are actually, for the most part, misinformed or uninformed. I remember, and probably many of you remember the Y2K, right? You know, where all the Christians in 1999, many Christians were preparing for the complete collapse of governmental system, right? Because something will happen to all the computers in the banking system. Christian leaders were writing books, right, warning Christians about Y2K, that somehow when everything changed 2000, right, expect that something bad will happen. And I remember during that time, I have a lot of Christian friends who are literally, right, stacking up their pantries with what? With canned foods, because they think that we're almost on the last days, right? The banking system will collapse. Guess what happened in year 2000? Nothing. Nothing happened in the year 2000. I remember I was just looking around me in the church during that time, and I just felt like we are a bunch of fools for even falling for this. Somehow we panicked, right? Not necessarily me, because I don't remember panicking during that time. I was just looking around at members of our church, and somehow everybody just moved on and thought that there's nothing wrong about that. That's it. It's good. Everybody's safe. But the problem is that we were the suckers for those kind of stuff in some sense. I remember in the church in the early 90s, I was so new in the U.S., and then we have members in our church actually telling us about 666 and Procter & Gamble, right? Telling us about, that this is like the sign of the beast, right? The sign of the Antichrist. right? And they were even proclaiming it in the church. That somehow, supporting Procter and Gamble products, right? In a way, supporting the Antichrist. And guess what? That was so rampant in church. So now that you're talking about the canon conspiracy, why it is actually in the church, right? This is not anything new. Christians have been suckers for conspiracy theories from the very beginning until now. Okay? And I think that needs to be changed. It gets tiring, right? For us to actually look at the church and we're looking like we are a bunch of fools, that no one is even actually shepherding us. Okay? You can only discern when you are adequately informed. So do not undermine the value of cultivating your mind, even as a Christian, because we need that. Right? If you want us to succeed in actually evangelizing the world, right, we need to be guardians of our own minds. Okay? Now, Jesus desires for the unity of the church and for shepherds to love and feed the sheep. And I think even until today, we should pursue for that. Right? We should pursue for unity. We should pursue, loving and feeding the sheep. If you are a pastor, if you are a leader of the church. Remember, Jesus told that to Peter when he told Peter, Peter, do you love me? And he asked Peter several times or a few times, do you love me, Peter? Do you love me, Peter? Do you love me, Peter? And then Peter kept on saying, yes, I love you. You know that I love you. And what was Jesus' response? Feed my sheep. Love my sheep. You cannot be a leader of the church without loving the sheep, without caring for the sheep. And so we need to redisciple our minds. We need to redisciple our hearts. We need to redisciple ourselves. Now, some of you might look at me and say, oh, all of those talk are just so ambitious. You bet it is. It is ambitious. What will a small church like Symposia do, right, to somehow influence, right, all of evangelicalism? Of course, that would be an ambitious thing for me to even dream about, and that seems, unrealistic. But we need to do whatever we can, even in small ways, to save the faith that has been entrusted to us. It's a sacred task. We have been entrusted with the truth of God. And if we're not going to protect our credibility, in some sense, that particular thing that we are actually that we are entrusted with, right? Sooner or later, it will be corrupted. Sooner or later, it will be gone. The moment we've lost our ability to dream as a church is the moment we lose opportunities to grow and make changes. And that's why I am dreaming here. That is why I'm actually projecting my ambition, my dreams for the church as a whole, not just for Symposia. That we need to worry, we need to take care, right, of the credibility of the church. That as we pass on Christian truth from one generation to the next, right, we need to show it respect. We need to treat it as sacred task, right? And we can only do that if we will not be reckless about our thinking, right? We can only do that if we will be informed, if we will avoid or prevent ourselves from being misinformed by others. Right? We cannot be effective followers of Christ and at the same time uninformed or misinformed, fighting the wrong battles, right? We cannot be like this forever. At some point, I think, we need to realize our mistakes, our faults, and we just need to ask for forgiveness. Now, I know many of the sermons that I preached this month are pretty harsh, right, and probably a little deep. And I know not a lot of people like that kind of things, but I think it needs to be said. Okay. If you will only keep yourself up to date with what's happening with evangelicalism, you will understand what it is that I'm actually telling you. Okay. But I know it's hard to inform people, especially when people are completely unaware of what's happening with evangelicalism in America. So that's why you have to read. Okay, so hopefully this will encourage you to read about evangelicalism, right, and look at what's happening to evangelicalism today. Um, and next week, starting next week, we're gonna start with uplifting messages in a way. Okay, we're gonna talk about picking up the pieces, right? Because it looks like after the pandemic, after this election, right? I think many of our lives are going to be. We will actually look back and say our lives have been damaged, right? We actually have what damaged relationships. We will have damaged lives, right? We will many of us will have damaged faith for after not being in church for 7 months in person, and so I think we need to actually address those issues. So that's what I'm gonna do, right, for the month of November. I'm gonna actually preach on picking up the pieces. So expect to hear some uplifting messages, because again, my goal is to rebuild our capacity to hope, right? That there's a better tomorrow for us Christians and for us who live here in the U.S. We can always hope that 2021 will be better than 2020. Okay. Now, so again, I just wanted to thank you for actually watching us today. And if you want to participate, we have this particular project this week where we wanted to actually donate, I think probably around a dozen Thanksgiving basket for this homeless shelter for homeless families in Upland. Okay, I forgot the name of the place, but it's a homeless shelter for homeless families. Okay, and we wanted to actually partner with them. So if you guys are actually interested, please let me know. Right, we just need to pack a Thanksgiving basket with some items that they have on the list, and we're hoping to do like 15 probably, right? And we can give it to them before November 11. Right, they're gonna distribute it to families who are actually in need, so that they can also celebrate Thanksgiving, just like what most of us will do this coming at the end of the month. Now, another thing that I wanted to announce is that Pat Stark is planning to give us offer us a webinar, okay, on how to sustain your marriage, right, during this time of pandemic. I was beginning to sense that probably some people in our church are having probably some problems with their marriage or something like that. And in order to address that problem, I asked Pastor Pat Stark. Yeah, he actually is a licensed marriage and family counselor. He has some kind of a graduate degree on that one. So that I think he's a good resource, right, for us. So if you're interested in joining, even if you're not part of Symposia, please join us as well. Okay, I think it will be a fun time. Okay, so let me pray before I let you guys go. Lord, I thank you for the people who are watching me today. Instead of making them upset or mad about what I said, allow what I said to move in their lives. Allow it to change them. Allow it to actually renew their minds. And that's pretty much what I'm trying to do here. I want people to rethink some of the things, right? Or to somehow make revisions on some of the things that they're thinking about in the past, so that they can probably see your truth better. Lord, help us to be inspired by your Son, Jesus Christ. Help us, oh God, to be inspired by his life. Help us, oh God, to be inspired by how he thought. Lord, we thank you. Thank you for the task and the burden that you have given on our shoulders here, the leadership of Symposia, for actually carrying the baton of the evangelical faith. And I know a lot of things are seemingly going against our way, right? It's not going our way. It looks like we're actually going against the tide, right? But I ask, oh God, that you bless us. Help us, oh God, to be faithful to your calling. Help us, oh God, to actually embrace the calling that you have given us. And help us, oh God, to make some changes, even if it is minute, right, in the lives of people through the ministries of the proclamation of the word. We thank you again. And I pray that you bless the people who are actually watching me today. For those who need healing, let there be healing. For those people who are actually having financial problems, Let there be freedom from their financial problems. Lord, I pray that you bless us. And in the name of Jesus, we pray. Amen. 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 Thank you. God bless you. See you guys next week. Bye.
Well, that's a wrap. Thank you for joining us today. I am so glad that we were able to interact with you on this Sunday. But please feel free to follow our Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube pages so that way you can see the content that we put out every week. Also, if you're interested in meeting with our lead pastor after service today, please stay tuned to the Zoom link, which will be listed in the comments below, so that way you can meet our pastor and get to know a little bit more about Symposia, and we get to know a little bit more about you. Thank you again for joining us today.